بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، خاتم النبيين، شفيع المذنبين، رحمة للعالمين، سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا وطبيب ذنوبنا، أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين المكرمين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين، روحي وأرواح العالمين، للتورى بمقدمه الفدا، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, salamun alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Our topic that we started yesterday was justice. Why did we start that? We said just knowing that God is there and that He has power and that He's made laws for us isn't enough for us to start obeying Him. Why we said that? Even in our lives, we gave the example of traffic laws. You know that there's police out there. You know that there are certain laws you have to obey on the road. But we choose not to follow certain types of laws. So what was the criteria? We said that when we personally feel that laws are unjust, or the person who made the laws, that person's unjust, then we choose not to follow it. So we had to say, now that we know that God exists, is He just? Number one, can He do any oppression? And then continuing on, which we'll go on to today, why is it that now that we've proven that He is just and He doesn't oppress, why do we see bad things happening in the world? So that will be our main question for tonight. We left off last night saying that there are four main reasons why somebody would oppress somebody else. Why would somebody take somebody else's rights? One reason we gave was ignorance. You just don't know what you're doing. It's by accident. And we said that that can't apply to God. Right? All knowledge is with Him. The second was, if somebody has a certain need, they need to fulfill. So they have to do this and take it from someone else. Right? We gave the example of food. You run out of food. You need someone else's food, so you steal from them. The third is inability. Inability meaning you don't have power. Now what does that mean? Let me give an example for that one. You see, sometimes people are put in situations because of people who are in power. They're forced to start oppressing other individuals because they have no other choice. Right? And you can think of people who are in certain countries under certain governments, and that government is forcing them to go take up arms and kill innocent civilians. And the government's probably threatening them with violence, so they have to join up. A good example is in many places in Africa where they constrict and hire and create child soldiers. These children don't know any better, right? But they're hired to oppress and hired to kill innocent civilians. So because of that lack of ability to go against their oppressor, they end up also oppressing. So a question then, does this apply to God? Of course not, right? Of course not. There is no one above Him, and there is no ability that He Himself doesn't have. And the last reason would be a very emotional reason, selfishness. Selfish meaning someone else has something and you desire it for yourself. Maybe you don't need it. Maybe you even have the power to get it yourself, but out of ease, out of selfishness, you want to go and take that from somebody else and oppress them. As you can see, the same argument will apply. Because this need doesn't apply to God, this selfishness doesn't apply to God, He can't oppress for this reason. So we mentioned ignorance, need, inability, and selfishness. And none of these things can apply to a God who is all knowledgeable, all powerful, and that has control over everything that happens in our lives. So this then gives us a rational reason to believe that he does no ounce of oppression to any of his creation. But the question still remains then, if he's not going to oppress us, and if he doesn't oppress us, why is it that we see bad things happening? When I see an innocent child being killed, I see that that's bad, that's injustice. And we said that God is the cause for everything. Doesn't he have the power to stop it? Why didn't he stop it? Why didn't he stop that injustice and oppression? Doesn't that make him, na'udhu billah, an oppressor? So we have to answer these questions. The other side of the equation, those of us who consider ourselves to be following God's words, God's commands, on the right path, right? The path of Ahlul-bayt. Well, we're trying to do what we have to, trying to do what we can to be better individuals. So I'm trying to be better, but sometimes why does it stink? Why don't I get what I want? I make du'as and I don't get what I ask for. I try to live a good life and sometimes I get bullied. Sometimes I get harassed. Sometimes I get picked on. My life doesn't look like a good life. Why is it that people like Yazid and Muawiyah and Saddam and Hitler and all these other evil people throughout history, why do they have such great, lavish, rich, wonderful lives? Right? Or you can take a look at celebrities nowadays, right? They're not living moral lives, many of them, but they get everything that they want. Money, power, fame, all of that. And then the people who are trying to do good, nobody knows their name. They usually get insulted, sometimes even in their own communities, at work, at school, everywhere. So if we are trying to do the right thing, then why are our lives so bad? Why do bad things happen to us? Shouldn't God be rewarding us for everything that we do that's good? So we have to answer this question as well. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. For the parents here, how many times have you had to argue with your children? Well, it usually doesn't happen in Orlando. Your weather is usually a very specific kind of weather. But imagine when it gets a little chilly outside, right? When it gets cold, before your kid goes out to play, what do you tell them? You got to put on your jacket, right? Or you got to wear a hat, right? Put on gloves, something like that. Right? You want them to dress appropriately so they don't get sick. But what usually happens, as parents you know, is they say, no, I don't need a jacket. I'll be fine. I don't need to wear a hat. I'm okay. The weather's not that cold. I'll be fine. So what happens? They go to school or they go to work. Well, your kids don't go to work if you're talking to them like they're a little kid like that and forcing them to wear clothes, but okay. Some parents still do that. So they go out, they play, and what happens the next morning? They wake up, oh, I don't feel so good. Right? And they get the sniffles, they start coughing. You say, I told you so. See what happens when you don't listen to me? This same principle happens in our lives all the time, even as adults. Allah says in chapter 6, verse 42, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمَمٍ مِّن قَبْلِكَ فَأَخَذْنَاهُمْ بِالْبَأْسَاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَضَرَّعُونَ. We sent to all these various ummats, all these various people, all these various tribes, we sent them prophets. Why did we do that? And then after we sent them that, then we gave them distress, we gave them bala, we gave them trials and tribulations and all these problems. Why did we do that? Why all these problems? Why? So that maybe, لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَضَرَّعُونَ. Maybe, just maybe, you guys will humble yourselves. And maybe you'll stop thinking that you know everything. You know better than God does. He sent us messengers specifically to say, sometimes we, on behalf of God, will tell you when you need to wear a jacket to go outside. Sometimes we know better for you, and we'll tell you what to do. You got to wear your hat, otherwise you're going to get sick. Now there's a big difference between not wearing a jacket and getting sick, and not obeying God, and then your whole nation gets wiped out with a flood. But obviously the level of sin is a bit different. Another verse. In the next verse, verse 43. فَلَوْلَا إِذْ جَاءَهُمْ بَأْسُنَا تَبَرُّؤُوا وَلَكِنْ قَسَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَزَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. So when the punishment came down to them, why didn't these people humble themselves? Even after your kid gets sick, and you tell them, I told you so, I told you to wear a jacket, and now you got sick. even after they're like, no, 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 it's something else. That has nothing to do with me not wearing a jacket. Right? They still don't want to listen sometimes. And then Allah gives you the reason. He says, it's because shaitan has made their hearts hard. And he made your actions good to you. Whatever you do is what's right. Anybody else who tells you what's right and what's wrong, you don't want to listen to them. Everything comes back to your own self. Remember the discussion we've had the first few nights, talking about the ego, that self that we're trying to understand, right? Our identity. Many of the problems in our life is this: we think we know better than everyone else around us, right? For the smallest things to the biggest things. The bigger ones would be in religion, right? You might have a marja or an ayatullah or a scholar give an opinion, and then you come and say, well, I don't agree, Sheikh, I don't like it. No. Have you studied books? Have you actually read up and researched? Are you humble enough to say, maybe I'm wrong, it doesn't sound right to me, but maybe it's because I don't know enough. Maybe if you explain more to me, then I'll understand. Or do we usually go into the conversation that, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, he's too conservative, or it's too liberal, or this is not my kind of scholar, I don't like this individual, right? Are we willing to humble ourselves and say, maybe I don't have enough information, maybe I need to learn a little bit more? If you never got sick, if all of us had perfect health, would you ever pray for good health? Honestly speaking. If you're in your lives, we never got old, we never got sick, we were just perfect our whole lives. Would you ever go and ask God for health? No. Why? Because you think, well, this has nothing to do with God. It's because of my diet, or it's because I exercise, or I take care of myself. This has nothing to do with God. Another example. Think about, for those who are in university or school still, when you study for an exam and you get a good grade, who do you give credit to? Who do you thank for getting that good grade? Do you say that, well, I put in the effort, I stayed up all night, I studied, I made note cards, I took notes, I put these in these online flashcards, I did everything? Or do you say, if God wanted to, while I was sitting at the exam, even though I studied all night, He could have made me forget every single little piece of information that I'd ever seen in my life. He could have. Who's the one who's in charge of all those atoms in our brain and everything there? It's God. He put it there in the first place. So sometimes when you forget something, it's the best way for us as a reminder to humble ourselves and say, yeah, I'm forgetting things because I'm not the one in charge of this. I might be sitting there reading and learning and doing all these classes, and when you're at work, you take these training courses. Yeah, there's some part of you involved, but your intellect is powerless without God. Remember what we said the other day. If God wanted to, the minute He stopped focusing on you existing and your brain working, you'd be done. Right? You'd be brain dead in a second. You'd move out of existence into non-existence just like that. So the first idea for why sometimes we think something's unjust, something's bad, something's harmful, is because God's trying to humble you. He's trying to get us to wake up and say, maybe you don't have enough information, and maybe you should rely on me first. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. I'm going to give a story from the sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam. And this story is really a beautiful one. And for those who haven't heard it, I would really encourage you to pay attention to this story and really try to practice this in your life and focus and reflect on it. So during the Imam's time, there was one of his companions. He came to the sixth Imam and said, we should go visit one of our other friends, right? A third person. Imam said, okay. So Imam got dressed, he went with the companion, they left the Imam's house, and they went to go visit this third friend of theirs. So they get to this third person's house, this other friend, this other companion. When they get there, he invites them inside, sits them down, offers them food and drink, etc. So the Imam and his friend, the first companion, they're sitting against a wall. Behind them, there's these shelves. And on these shelves, he had different items there, the person whose house it was, yeah? So on that shelf, there were some eggs there. Out of nowhere, one of the eggs fell down from that shelf, landed on the ground. And what do you think happened? Probably should have broken, right? Or at least cracked. Egg fell, nothing happened. So when that happened, the Imam turns to his companion quietly and says, we have to get up and get out of here right now. I'm paraphrasing, right? The Arabic is a bit more eloquent, but I'm paraphrasing for you. He's like, yeah, we got to get out of here. So they say their salam, they say their khudafis, and they leave that house. So once they leave and they walk, far away, that companion asks the imam, he said, why didn't you just get up and tell us to leave? Well, what happened? What did you see? He said, you saw what happened when that egg fell down, right? The egg fell, and it didn't even have a scratch or a mark on it. That person whose house it was, that person is so cursed and despised and hated by Allah because of that harshness in his heart. He's so arrogant and so proud of himself that Allah won't even let an egg crack in his house. Why? Because now this person thinks that he's on top of the world, right? A normal person, if their hearts are soft, right, and if they reflect and they're humble, if something bad happens in their life, something as simple as an egg cracking, they'd say, okay. Sometimes we blame it on nazar, or you guys say najar, right? Najar, nazar, whatever. Or you blame jinn, which, let's not get into that, that's a separate lecture altogether. You blame other things. But at the very least, you won't say that, well, it's because of me, because of my luck. I'm the one who's in charge of all this. A person whose life sometimes is so good and without flaw, it's a wake-up call. There's a reason that there's nothing bad going on in your life. It's because Allah possibly has said, there's no room for this person to thank me anymore. This person has no humility in their heart. So why am I going to bother giving them a sign? So then the question is, when bad things happen to us, what does that mean? I think you understand so far, but we'll go into more details inshallah. Think about if there was no tragedy of Karbala. If Karbala didn't take place, what do you think would be our Shia identity right now? What do you think would have happened to Islam? Things had to get so bad in the Muslim Ummah. People had to go so far away from the basic tenets of Islam that Imam Hussein alayhi salam had to give up himself and his whole family and his companions. All of that so that, hey, maybe you guys shouldn't have a Muslim leader that drinks and is open fasiq. That's how bad things got. And sometimes we think about Karbala and the people of Kufa and everything that happened and say, man, those guys are really messed up. If I was with the Imam, I never would have let it happen. Are you letting it happen today in your own households? You should think about that for yourself. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. How many of you like rain? You're in Orlando, you're forced to like rain, right? Especially in Florida. How many of you actually like rain? I don't like it at all. I can't stand rain. If, let's say, your life, you were put in the same position as Jim Carrey was in Bruce Almighty, like you had God's powers for a day or so, what would you do? I'd tell you what I'd do. I'd stop rain, because I don't like it. I'd cut it off altogether. Now, you guys know, if, let's say, I stopped rain altogether, what do you think would happen? Right? The rest of the world, where crops are growing, there'd be a drought, things would dry up, and then there'd be food shortages. Because of the food shortages, animals would start dying, and because of that, we wouldn't have our burgers and chicken and all that other stuff. It would screw up the life cycle completely. Right? Just because me, arrogant little me, decided I don't like rain, so I'm going to cut it off. What was our definition of justice? Did we say it's whatever we feel is good, whatever we feel is right, whatever we feel is wrong? Is morality based on what you and I think in our brains, in our hearts? We said, no, justice is putting everything where it belongs, according to what Imam Ali said, right? Put everything in its rightful place. Now, how do I know all the environmental and the weather conditions that are needed throughout the world? I don't know it. I don't have enough knowledge. Even if I wanted to put rain in the places where I think it should go, I'll probably get it wrong because I don't know where it belongs. I'm not into farming. I don't know that stuff. I don't have the knowledge of agriculture. Take another example. Have you ever been into somebody's house, right? You walk and you see a piece of furniture and you're like, why'd they put their couch over here? This is a weird place for a couch. And then later on, when you take a look at everything else in the house, you say, okay, now I see what they were going for. Now I see the kind of design style, the feng shui or whatever they were going for. It makes sense now. Why? Because you got the bigger picture. If you just walk in, the first thing you see is a couch in front of you, maybe it doesn't make sense. Right? But when you start seeing the other pieces of furniture, the other places in the house, everything else, then you can say, all right, now this makes sense. So what happens? When we decide what is good and bad, we're doing it based on this small little picture. Right? We just have this tunnel vision when we're looking at the world. And we think based on this, because a person died in a natural disaster, that's bad. How do you know that? How do you know that was really bad for that individual? Do you have knowledge of their life? Do you have knowledge of their family, of the way that they were going to turn out in 5, 10 years? If, for example, this person who died in a natural disaster, imagine that the next day they were going to go out and commit a mass murder. Wouldn't it be better that they died the night before in that natural disaster than living an extra day to commit a crime? Of course you'd say, yeah. So sometimes these things happen in order to deter and stop a greater evil, right? What's the problem here? The problem is we think we have all knowledge in front of us. But Allah says in the Quran, وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. I'm giving you guys this much. That's what God's saying. You guys get this. That's all you get. No matter how much you try, scientific studies, environmental studies, natural studies, philosophy, irfan, keep going, research, learn, great. You're still only going to have this much. That's all you're going to get. Even for those who are with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Even those who are around the Prophet or the Imams, they were learning constantly, day by day by day. Somebody like Salman, right, who is from the Ahlul-bayt, according to the words of the Ahlul-bayt. He had the highest level of knowledge outside of Ma'asum, they say, right? But still, every night he needed to learn. He still only got this much. He still needed to learn and grow. So what about us? How is it that we can have such opinions and be so arrogant in our lives that we think we know what's good and bad for us? We know what's good and bad for everybody else in the community. We know what's good and bad for the state of Florida. We know what's good and bad for our country. You know what's good and bad for the world. Why do you have that right? Where did you get that idea? Again, this goes back to your ego. It's because you think you have this whole idea. You've put yourself in the same position as Fir'aun did. Ana rabbukum al-a'la. You're not saying it outright. Deep down, that's what you feel. I'm this God. I know what's going on. I've got all the variables. I got all the knowledge in front of me. I can make a valid decision. And as we had mentioned in the workshop on Saturday night, I guarantee, especially for those who like to talk and discuss religious and political ideas, I guarantee you guys haven't even touched 1/1000th of Islamic knowledge. Probably even less you've touched. I mean, ask anybody who's been in the hawza and they've sat with a group of students or a group of teachers. There's so much Islamic information available. If our greatest scholars, Ayatollah Khoui, rahmatullah alayh, Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayh, Ayatollah Sistani, may Allah protect him, all of our maraji, in their books, have you ever seen that this is the fatwa and everybody else is wrong? Have you ever seen that in your life? Or do you see in their works, here's my fatwa, here's my tafsir of Quran, wallahu a'lam, Allah knows better, I could be wrong. I think one of the problems that we face, especially with this idea of religious knowledge and debates, is sometimes we've never seen two scholars disagree in a civil manner. We see them separately, right? One scholar might come, give one opinion, and then later on someone else comes and gives another opinion. And you have, as laymen, you can't compare, you don't know who's right or who's wrong. So usually you decide, you become the deciding factor. Well, I like the first guy because he's more progressive. Well, I like the other one because he's more traditional, he's more conservative. Everything comes back to yourself, your ego, rather than saying, well, which one is the actual true answer? How do I know? I have never looked at a book of Usul al-Fiqh. I've never studied any tafsir of Quran. I don't know anything about the Arabic language. Who am I to judge? How am I going to know? You can learn, that's one step, and as you learn, things will become a bit clearer. But again, even at the highest levels, you see those who have the most knowledge in the world right now, in the hawza, still say, we don't know, I'm not sure, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. It's one of the pleasures of being in the hawza for myself, seeing two great scholars, one philosopher, one arif, completely opposite sides, completely different opinions, but sitting there, having a debate in front of the public, laughing, smiling, telling jokes, having tea together. Unfortunately, I don't think we've seen something like that yet in this country or in the West. And it's something for our communities to consider. It may be a good idea. Obviously, you guys can brainstorm and discuss yourself. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. I want to share one other story and then highlight our last point, and then we'll end for tonight and move on to Q&A. And this story is narrated regarding Nabi Nuh alayhi salam. So this story in the books, they say it's narrated towards the end of the Prophet Nuh's mission, right? We say that 950 plus, maybe 1,000, over 1,000, been preaching to his people, and they're just not getting the message. very few people actually came to the religion. Most people just denied him, threw stones, insulted. We know the story of all our prophets, right? That's what happened to him. So now, just like any other person, rationally, Nabi Nuh got a little fed up. He got a little tired. He said, okay, God, I've been preaching for hundreds of years, over 1,000 years. I think it's time that you take these guys out, right? It's time for a punishment, right? Flood, earthquake, you got to do something to them because they're not listening. I've given them the proofs. I've given them chances. You've given them everything. They're not listening. You might as well get rid of them. Send a adhab, send a punishment down for them and take them out. So what happens? So, the prophets, they all had various different jobs. Usually the jobs they had were more hands-on, blue-collar work, we call it, right? So one of the jobs they say that Nabi Nuh had was that he was into pottery, right? He would make pots, pans, cups, things like that. So of course, when somebody who's connected to God, connected to Al-Jamil, the beautiful one, whenever they put their hands into their works, everything they do comes out beautifully, right? They don't just do something just to get it done and make a profit. They put their heart and soul into everything that they do. So the Prophet Nuh, whenever he would make these clay pots, he would do so with love, right? He would make them very, very beautiful. But of course, a few of the ones that he made were more beautiful than anything else. They were his favorite clay pots. Somebody came once to his shop, and they asked about those most beautiful ones. He said, I'll take those. So the person buys them, takes the pot, and he smashes it right in his face. And Nabi Nuh jumps back, he says, why did you do that? He's like, what do you mean? I bought it, it was my property, I can do it. How much time, effort, how much love, passion, kindness I put into this clay pot, and you just took it and destroyed it like that? Then the person to give you a message. He said, this clay pot that you love so much, that I destroyed, look how upset beings, 900, 1,000 years, Allah doesn't stop. How quickly we switch on individuals. We get so vengeful sometimes, so hateful, so spiteful. They say, husn dhan, give people the benefit of the doubt. It's tough, I know, right? Because sometimes people do dumb things. It's tough to give them the benefit of the doubt. But even a prophet, 900 years, 1,000 years, he, I think rightfully so, lost his patience to some extent, right? He's a prophet, preaching this long, the clay pot breaks, and look at his reaction. Allah sends a message. Have love and mercy. Don't be so quick to judge. And this is the final point about justice. Sometimes justice does make sense, but Allah says, my mercy makes more sense. My love and compassion, not my justice. In Dua Kumail and in the Quran, Allah says, سَبَقَتْ رَحْمَتُهُ غَضَبَهُ. My mercy supersedes my wrath. My love, my compassion is more important than my wrath. We had mentioned it in the interfaith speech the other day. We're saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim 113 out of 114 times, aren't we? In the Quran. Allah says, listen, I want you to ask for help with my names, but there's two names I need you to remember more important than anything else. One is ar-Rahman. You need to make sure that you're compassionate with every single thing, not just humans, everything, and have an overarching, universal, general love for all these things. Have that compassion there. But then ar-Rahim, for the mu'mineen, for those who are special, especially the Shia, the ones who are practicing, the ones who are striving, the people of haqq, the Ahlul-Akhirah, the Ahlul-Jannah, yeah, you give them a little bit extra. And we know that in the practices of the Imam, right? When they go out and they give charity and give sadaqah, yes, go and give some bread to, for example, Christians in the middle of the night. But for the Shias, for the Muslims, they'd go and say, here's some bread, and then here's meat too. So yes, you help everyone, you show love and compassion to everyone, but we're allowed to discriminate. Show a little bit of extra love to a Shia. You can show a little bit of extra love to a Muslim. There's nothing wrong with that. Why? Because everybody who's part of your own tribe, obviously, they should be, because they're on the same path. They share that same identity, they deserve more love and compassion. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. A few other points we have to go through about, and we'll wait till tomorrow, inshallah. And the last point we're going to have to go to then will be, okay, but still it doesn't answer the question of why us as Shia, why are bad things happening to us? What does that have to do with God's mercy? If I don't get that job that I prayed for, If I get a flat tire on the way to an interview, how is that God being merciful to me? It seems like He's being vengeful and that He hates me. How do I understand that? We'll go through the details, inshallah, tomorrow night. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So let's move on to the questions, inshallah. First, we'll start with the questions from last night. One more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First question from last night was, can God give up His power? It's a good question. And a lot of these questions about God doing the impossible, God giving up something, God doing certain things, are all related to the way that we understand God and the sifat that He has. So I mentioned before that unrelated questions to the topic we'll have a separate session for. And even some of these questions, which I know, and you all, I'm sure you're probably aware, I'm speeding through them. Obviously, because these questions are something which are usually discussed in one whole class of aqa'id, or one whole class of philosophy, which usually means you need 30 minutes to 60 minutes to go through it. So for me to wrap it up in a minute or two is pretty tough. So I can try to give short answers, which may do justice, which probably won't do justice, but we're going to have a special session on Saturday, inshallah. After the main program, there'll be a two-part session. The first part will be being a modern Muslim. It'll be an open forum kind of discussion. And then the second part, we'll go through the list from the first night up until that night. All the questions which were unrelated, we'll start addressing them one by one, and then it'll be just an open Q&A. So regarding this question of can God give up His power, we say no. Why? Because when something is essential, when it's an essential trait for you, it's a part of you, you can't give it up. Because once you give it up, you're not that thing anymore. I'll go back to the same analogies we've been using. If salt loses saltiness, it's not salt anymore. If water is no longer wet, it doesn't have the ability to make something else wet, it doesn't have wetness, it's not watery, it's not water anymore. If God gives up His existence, His power, His knowledge, all of this, which is His essential nature, He's not God anymore. That's something else we're talking about. That's the shortened answer. Next question from last night. Why didn't God just give us free will and no ego? Short answer, again, these are one of these really deep ones. The short answer is because we needed to have an ego in order to truly understand free will. It ties into this idea of the reason for creation, which I said we're going to spend a separate lecture on. Why we were created? We were created to reach perfection. But obviously, the only real, true, perfect thing is Allah. Everything else is imperfect. Right? Even the prophets and imams have a level of imperfection in them. Right? There's Allah, and we say ma siwallah. There's Allah and non-Allah, or other than Allah. Everything else that's not Allah is imperfect. When things are imperfect, you have to go through a specific path, a specific kind of method, a specific struggle in order to gain perfection. What we have waiting for us in heaven, that perfection that we're all looking for, those rewards, you have to go and struggle through them. So they say, for example, the ego is there in order for you to break the ego. If you don't have an ego, there's nothing to break, then you're just an angel. And you see, an angel and a human are much, much different. An angel is doing ibadah 24/7. But they have no choice. That's why they don't have any value. The ego, our free will, gives us the ability to choose the wrong answer or choose the right answer. Choosing the right answer actually gives us value. Imagine, I think Husseini gives this example, I really like it. He says, if you were given an exam, and a multiple choice exam, and the only answers on there were right answers, would there really be any value in you doing that test? No. The only way to truly give value to a test is if there's a lot of wrong answers there. The ego is our pull to the wrong answer, to the wrong side. Us breaking away gives us value and actually makes heaven worthwhile. How do we prove to atheists that God exists? We went through the proofs a few nights ago. If you're looking for a specific method and methodology of discourse, we talked a little bit about how to have a discourse and communicate and have a dialogue. We talked on Saturday. If you want to sit and kind of have a mock debate back and forth, we can do that maybe after the lecture, inshallah, or maybe even discuss it on Saturday in the second part. And the other questions are off topic, so we can address those on Saturday, inshallah. How do you explain the tyrants of the world that were allowed to live long lives and not taken in something like a natural disaster? This will be addressed right in the beginning of the lecture tomorrow. You said that as a layman, as lay people, as laymen, we do not understand where the truth stands when there is a difference, when there are differences of opinions between different religious leaders. Didn't God give us intellect to decipher these and other opinions? So, did God give us intellect? Absolutely. But did He give us an intellect to decipher opinions among scholars? That's a separate question. Okay. So what is a scholar? Again, we'll have to break this down a little bit. So when a scholar, and I think this is actually a good session to have if there's time. When a scholar is making a fatwa, what do they have to do? What do they have to know? First and foremost, they need knowledge of Arabic, right? You have to have classical Arabic, Fusha, right? Fasih Arabic. The Arabic of that time, not Arabic today, which is a different thing. Arabic of that time, the same one that the prophets and the imams spoke. You need that Arabic, all the ins and outs of that grammar, and knowing all the differences of opinion on grammar. For example, when you have two words and there's a waw in between, let's say you have samawat wal ard, heavens and sky. Heavens and earth. Since Allah mentions heavens before earth, is there any significance? There's one group, there's one opinion that says, no, it doesn't matter. Allah could have said, ard wa samawat, there's no difference. You can say, earth and heavens and earth, it doesn't make a difference. You have another opinion among scholars that say, no, when Allah mentions something first, it's because it has more importance. There's a third opinion that says, when something comes first in this conjunction, it means that it came first in terms of time. So when Allah says, jinn wal ins, it's not because jinn are better than us, because jinn were created before us. So you see, three opinions on this one small topic that you'd have to spend a couple years just to discuss this. That's one idea I gave you. And this is one part of Arabic grammar. And Arabic grammar itself has different parts. A mujtahid needs to know this. They need to know logic, mantiq, which we talked a little bit about Saturday night, and all the different views on mantiq and logic. You need to know aqaid in and out. You need to know Quran, the differences of opinions about tafsir of Quran. You need to know all of the ahadith and have them in the palm of your hand. It's easy for us to go into some English translation or Urdu translation or whatever, grab a hadith and say, look, this is what the Imam wanted. Okay, but did you know that there's 1,000 other hadith related to this topic that you didn't look at? Well, you didn't memorize Wasa'il al-Shia or Bihar al-Anwar. You don't know that there's hundreds of thousands of different ahadith out there. Okay, let's say even you take all of the hadith on one subject. Then there's other sciences related to hadith, rijal. All those people who are narrating, how do you know all of them are telling the truth? What if one of those guys in that chain of narrations, what if he's a Sunni? Are you still going to trust him or not? Difference of opinion. What if one of those guys is a Shia, but he ended up being a Waqifi, meaning he stopped at the 7th Imam? So what if this Waqifi told the narration before he became a Waqifi? What if he told the narration after he became a Waqifi? What if he was known to tell the truth, but he was still a Waqifi? All of these are discussed. I can go on and on and on. I think you're getting the idea that this is not so simple as, well, I got an intellect, I can figure out what's right and wrong. One quick example about the moon sighting, NASA stuff, because that's everybody's favorite thing to use their intellect for, right? And this one I'm spending time on because I think it is very important. That's why I think I'll take a bit extra time on this specific question. Moon sighting. So basically now we have a few different ideas. One is you have to see the moon with your naked eye, right? For example, Ayatollah Sistani's opinion, right? You can use a telescope to find the general area, but once you pull that telescope or the binoculars away, if you cannot see it with your naked eye, it doesn't count, doesn't work. That's his opinion. May Allah protect him. Ayatollah Khamenei says no, you can see it with the aid of instruments. So you can use binoculars, you can use a telescope, all those things. So even if you can't see it with the naked eye, you can rely on the instruments, and that'll count as sight. Other ulama, they say, listen, the birth of the new moon, the astronomical new moon, according to, for example, NASA calculations or whatever, that counts as the new month. And they have the reasons for that. And this is only a part of the equation. You have the point of ufuq, of the horizon. You have shared nights. All these different parts of the equation, which those who have studied and have read the books know there's a lot there. So now some people will come forward and say, well, to me, it makes sense that you would use NASA calculations. Why? Because the point is, we're supposed to fast when the moon is born. Okay, that makes sense. But look at the hadith and look at the verse of the Quran. It says fast when you see the moon. Ru'ya. It uses the literal word sight. Now when a mujtahid is looking at that, what is he supposed to do? Is he supposed to use his intellect and say, well, I think God here meant telescope. If I tell you right now, go see the food, or go look at the food, I mean go look at the food. I don't mean, hey, go use a telescope and look at it over there. I don't mean go use binoculars. I don't mean go look at somebody's Instagram post of the food. I mean, you go take a look at it. But another scholar could say, no, God here means look, even if you can use instruments, it's okay. Behind all of this, you have months and months and months of discussion in the Dars al-Kharij, the Bahth al-Kharij, which is the highest level of studies in the Hawza. They sit there debating every single little word in Arabic. And how are they going to debate that? Why? Because they've studied the Arabic language, so they can debate that. Okay, this word sight in Arabic, ru'ya. Back when the Arabs were using it, did they mean only physical sight? Did they mean you could use a telescope or a periscope? How else did they use it? Did they use it differently in poetry? Did they use it specifically in business this way? You have to look at all of these parts of the equation. And I'm giving you just a part of it so far, just a little bit. So hopefully with just this little bit of information, now we can, what's the keyword, humble ourselves, yeah, and say, maybe my intellect is not enough. Maybe you need some information. Think about the famous debates you have right now, climate change. You have people who deny it outright. You have people who are anti-vaxxers, right, who deny getting vaccinations. So for those who are scholars, who are doctors, who have read the medical evidence, say, anybody who believes in this anti-vaccination movement, that vaccinations cause X, Y, Z, they're being fooled. They don't know the medical research. They're just listening to a few random articles or YouTube videos. They don't know how to decipher the material. The same applies in any field of science. You want to have an opinion, okay, have it. Maybe keep it to yourself, and maybe research and ask questions. Learn, and you can see that process. So I went on. I'll have to stop from there because this one was really important, and I really felt that people should hear this. I apologize for going over time. The rest of the questions we'll try to get to, inshallah, tomorrow night. وآخر دعوان أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته